Tonight in Baltimore, the search for answers reaches a turning point. After days of careful review and community cooperation, city investigators say they have identified and detained the person connected to last weekend's nighttime turmoil in northwest Baltimore. One life was lost, several neighbors were hurt, and a child continues to recover. Facts that have weighed on an entire block and, in many ways, on an entire city. What began as a porch gathering became a test of patience, precision, and the power of small details to guide a large team toward clarity. From the first minutes after the incident, officials emphasized two promises: move fast without guessing, and keep the public informed without risking the integrity of the case. Those promises shaped every update and every pause. Detectives built a timeline the old-fashioned way, angle by angle, timestamp by timestamp, while community members opened their doorbell clips, storefronts shared footage, and transit logs filled in the spaces between. The picture that emerged wasn't dramatic in a single frame. It was persuasive across many frames. An unexpected assist came from media host and former Protective Service agent Dan Bongino, whose audience helped elevate a precise visual cue that might otherwise have passed unnoticed. On air, he slowed the moment down, pointed to a small emblem briefly visible in a window reflection, and asked viewers to help verify it responsibly. The result was a focused tip: no leaps, no labels, just a careful observation that aligned with what investigators were already mapping. That alignment mattered. It didn't replace the work of the case. It accelerated it. This is the story of how scattered clues became a clear line, and how a community, a broadcast, and a patient investigative team moved in step. It's about the steady rhythm of good process: collect, compare, confirm. It's about neighbors who chose cooperation over speculation, and officials who chose precision over speed for speed's sake. And it's about the small, human details: the porch light, the paper plate, the faint logo on a sleeve, that, taken together, help turn confusion into comprehension, and a city's long night into a measured step toward accountability. It began simply: porch lights, paper plates, a shared meal on a warm evening. Conversation drifted between summer plans and neighborhood errands. A radio played quietly from an open window, the kind of background sound that blends into the glow of a block, that knows its own rhythm. Then the calm thinned. A commotion at the corner. Shouts, not angry so much as urgent. Screens slammed shut, and living room lamps blinked on as families moved indoors. Within minutes, sirens threaded the air. First a distant wail, then a layered chorus, closing the distance with practiced precision. First responders moved with calm choreography. One team securing the street, another guiding families to safer spots, another starting checks on those who needed care. Neighbors stepped up with small, essential tasks: handing out water, calling relatives, guiding elders downstairs. A local shopkeeper rolled up his gate not to sell anything, but to clear a path for medics. The block that had been settling into a weekend evening now felt suddenly exposed, as if the routine fabric of things had been tugged, just enough to reveal the threads underneath. By dawn, the rush of the night had given way to the quiet grind of documentation. Detectives walked the corridor on foot, noting camera angles and sight lines. They traced likely entry and exit paths, listening more than talking. A compact sedan appeared in multiple clips, entering, leaving, looping back. The timestamps suggested intent, not coincidence. Storefront cameras, a bus stop lens, and two doorbell devices contributed partial views. Nothing crisp on its own, but together forming a workable sequence. Residents described the same few details in different words: a jacket with a faint emblem, the way a streetlight cast a reflection in a window, the pause of a vehicle that seemed to hover before moving on. Investigators logged each recollection, then cross-checked it against what the footage could actually support. The timeline took shape: approach, brief stop, departure, return. Even the soundscape of the night: tires over patched asphalt, the distant hum of an air unit, the overlapping sirens, was folded into the reconstruction to help align minutes and frames. What the team did not yet have was a confirmed name or a motive they could stand behind publicly. The connecting fiber between a blurred sleeve and a real person was still out of reach. But the corridor was defined, the vehicle style consistent, and the movement pattern strong enough to guide the next round of questions. The night had shifted from confusion to method. From porch light to sirens to clip-by-clip patience, the city's long work was underway. City investigators stitched together the hours before and after the event with the steady cadence of a careful audit. They started by normalizing time. Every clip, doorbell, storefront, transit stop, municipal poll cam, was matched to a master clock so that minutes aligned and clock drift couldn't mislead the sequence. Rain had fallen earlier in the evening, leaving shallow reflections that helped and hindered in equal measure. Helpful because reflections sometimes revealed details the lens missed. Tricky because glare could disguise distance. Technicians logged each source, the angle of view, and the margin of error, then pinned those notes to a board that would grow dense but readable, frame by frame. They compared camera angles and cross-referenced timestamps, not just by the numbers stamped on the video, but by what the scene itself confirmed. Traffic light cycles, bus arrivals, a deli sign that switches from open to closing soon, at exactly the same minute every night. Travel intervals were measured between intersections, like rungs on a ladder. If a compact sedan entered the corridor at one point and appeared again 3 blocks later, analysts calculated the likely route, subtracting paths made improbable by one-way streets, roadwork, or a red light phase that would have forced a longer wait. A fuel receipt surfaced early. Same corridor, minutes before the first pass of the sedan. The receipt didn't name a person, but it gave a timestamp, a pump number, and a camera that watched cars nose in and out. In the background of that clip, the roofline and side mirror profile matched what appeared later on the block. Not proof, just alignment. Next came a doorbell lens that caught a jacket with a faint emblem, there and gone in a window reflection. Frame differencing sharpened the outline. A single glint revealed the emblem wasn't printed but stitched. Analysts noted shoulder height relative to the window latch, a small cue for approximate stature. At a bus stop camera farther down, a silhouette stepped off a curb, face half lit by a shelter ad. The posture looked familiar to neighbors who would watch the montage later. A slight forward lean, a left-hand habit of adjusting a sleeve. Again, nothing definitive on its own. But when the same movement appeared in 2 other clips, the investigators marked it as consistent characteristic, useful for ruling out rather than rushing to identity. Each element was small. A storefront clip suggested the sedan paused twice without parking. A delivery van's dashcam, shared by a cooperative driver, captured the same car in its wide angle just before a light changed, offering a clean view of the tail lamp design. A shopkeeper remembered a decal bundle a few months back. Inventory records confirmed the brand, not the buyer. A parking sensor registered a near stop on a side street at a time that lined up with the sedan's second pass. Even the weather helped. Puddles on the north side of the street lingered longer, indicating which lanes were used on each approach. Human memory was logged carefully, too. A neighbor noted the soft clatter of a roof rack, which explained why the sedan's profile looked taller in one clip than another. A teenager pointed out a faint bumper scuff visible only when the car eased past a lit storefront window. A night manager from the corner market remembered the driver wearing a jacket with an emblem he couldn't place. He did remember the color and the way the sleeve bunches near the wrist. Investigators didn't elevate any single recollection above the footage, but they let these details steer which angles they rear-viewed. With the time map set, analysts ran interval tests. How long would it take to move from camera A to camera B if a driver obeyed the speed limit, caught one red, and paused once? They repeated the test, assuming one green wave and no pause. The real-world clips matched the middle case: steady pace, short hold, return loop. That pattern was strong enough to discard several tempting but incorrect routes, and it left a corridor that fit every timestamp within a slim window. The result was a map that felt less like a chase and more like a proof. The sedan's first pass, the brief stop, the exit, the return, the near stop on the side street, the second exit, the jacket emblem, stitched not printed, the sleeve adjustment habit, the roof rack clatter. Each piece was annotated with source, time, and confidence. Together they formed a route, a rhythm, and a likely radius for whoever was driving and walking that night. And yet, the map still lacked a label. There was no confirmed name, no line that could be read out at a podium without caveat. The work had narrowed the possibilities to a handful of blocks and a short list of owners of similar vehicles. It had not, by itself, spoken a single identity aloud. That restraint was the point. In the quiet of the operations room, the board showed direction without presumption, a lattice of frames, receipts, and intervals, waiting for the one clean, corroborated detail that would let the picture match a person. That is where a different signal entered the mix. On his program, Dan Bongino slowed the story to a careful frame-by-frame walkthrough, keeping the focus on what anyone could already see. Publicly available clips, time-stamped images, and one fleeting detail, a customized decal that flickered on a jacket sleeve in a window reflection. He made 2 points repeatedly. First, don't leap from a detail to a name. Second, if you think you recognize the decal, send the information to the official tip line or to the show's producers, so it can be passed to investigators without prompting any private contact or speculation online. The segment functioned less like a verdict and more like a lab note read aloud. Producers displayed stills with faces blurred and house numbers masked. They avoided brand names that could trigger a rush of look-alike claims. A graphic on the lower third reminded viewers, verify, then report. No outreach to individuals. By treating the audience as patient co-reviewers rather than a crowd to be stirred, the broadcast set a tone that matched the investigators' methodical pace. Within hours, a message landed in the show's inbox from a viewer who volunteers with a local hobby group. The group, it turned out, orders a particular sleeve decal in small batches from a neighborhood printer. The viewer didn't name anyone. They simply explained the ordering pattern and offered to connect authorities with the group lead for confirmation. The producers packaged the note with timestamps, contact details, and a short summary, then related directly to the city's detectives, copying the public tip address so the record would be consistent on both ends. Inside the department, that tip was logged as an external lead, scored against a short rubric the team was already using. Does the detail appear in multiple clips? Is there a plausible geographic link? Can a third party verify the manufacturing or purchase trail? The decal lead earned a provisional yes on each count. Detectives did not pivot blindly. They cross-checked the hobby group's recent orders with the printer's invoices, confirmed that only a handful of patches had been produced in the past year, and noted that several members lived within the same small radius already highlighted by the travel interval analysis. The effect was subtle but important. Instead of somewhere in the city, the search narrowed to this pocket of blocks and these few names, not because a broadcast pointed at anyone, but because a broadcast helped surface a verifiable breadcrumb that fit evidence already on the board. The show did not close the case. It accelerated a line of inquiry the investigators were pursuing, and it did so without public naming, without guesswork, and without encouraging amateur stakeouts. That balance mattered. Crowdsourcing can create noise as easily as clarity. Here, process kept the signal clean. The audience became a bridge, not to a conclusion, but to a confirmable connection. The hobby group lead confirmed order dates. The printer confirmed quantities. The detectives matched those dates to known movements along the corridor. A slender thread tightened. And with that, the picture moved one square closer to a name, while the standards that protect good cases, caution, documentation, and chain of custody, stayed firmly in place. With a warrant prepared and safety plans in place, officers approached a modest brick row house just after sunrise on Tuesday. The air was pale and still. Delivery trucks hadn't yet started their rounds. The approach was quiet by design. No flashing bars, no raised voices, just a short knock, a measured greeting, and a simple request for the occupant to step outside. The person of interest complied without resistance, hands visible, posture steady. A neighbor walking a small dog paused half a house away. An officer gave a brief nod that everything was under control. The moment felt procedural because it was. Transport was just as calm. At headquarters, the process moved from screens to statements, from the glow of public clips to the glow of a desk lamp in an interview room. Intake officers recorded standard details and explained next steps in neutral language. A property sheet noted a phone, a set of keys, and a jacket with a distinctive sleeve decal, photographed in place, then carefully packaged, labeled, and sealed. Each step was logged to preserve a clean chain of custody. Each seal number was read aloud and double-checked before the bag was placed on the evidence shelf. Investigators didn't rush the conversation. Counsel was made available. A detective outlined the timeline the team had already assembled. The compact sedan's passes along the corridor, the fuel receipt time-stamped at a nearby station, the clips that showed the faint emblem glinting in a window. The questions were narrow and factual. Were you driving this route? Is this your jacket? Can you account for the time between these two intersections? The person of interest acknowledged being on the block that night and arriving in a car consistent with the one seen in multiple videos. He described an errand, a turn taken out of habit, and a pause on a side street that matched what the cameras had already captured. While the interview progressed, parallel teams worked their checklists. One pair verified employment logs, clock-in and clock-out entries, plus a note about a last-minute shift change. Another contacted the fuel station to confirm the pump assignment and camera angle for the receipt time. A third team revisited the printer that handled the hobby group's small batch decal orders, confirming invoice numbers and pickup dates. None of these pieces named a person on their own. Together, they supported the same arc the timeline suggested. Back at the row house, a warrant team moved with the same steady rhythm. They photographed entry points, noted the condition of rooms, and looked for items specifically named in the warrant. The jacket with the distinctive decal was found where expected and matched prior photos by stitch pattern and wear along the cuff. Nearby, officers saw a small toolkit and a spool of wire, ordinary for someone who liked to fix things, but nothing beyond the narrow scope of the checklist was disturbed. Doors were closed behind them, and a contact card was left with a number for questions about property handling. By midday, the board in the operations room had fewer blank spaces. Travel records matched the camera intervals. The employment log explained a timing gap. The fuel receipt, the pump camera, and the sedan's roofline aligned. The jacket emblem, faint in reflection but clear under proper light, was now cataloged with precise photos and measurements. The community tip, properly vetted, fit like the missing piece in a puzzle already close to complete. Officials drafted a brief statement for the afternoon update. The language was measured. A person was in custody. Cooperation had been professional. Additional steps were underway. No dramatics, no speculation. Just a reminder that cases move fastest when patience and precision lead. In the softly lit interview room, the desk lamp hummed. Papers lay squared at the corners, and the conversation continued, focused on the small, verifiable intervals that turn a long night into a structured account. The person in custody is Marcus Hale, 31, a local resident many recognized but few really knew. He grew up 2 bus lines from Park Heights in a second-floor walk-up, where the kitchen table doubled as a workbench. Neighbors remember a quiet kid who fixed bikes and old speakers in middle school, who could solder a frayed wire by the glow of a desk lamp and bring a dead radio back with a new fuse and patience. A science teacher once let him take home discarded circuit kits. Marcus returned them labeled and neatly sorted, with notes in the margins about what each part did. He was careful with things, and people say, even more careful with himself. Slow to anger, slower to open up. After graduation, the path narrowed. He tried a little of everything: warehouse shifts, courier routes, a seasonal slot refurbishing used devices. Some contracts ended without warning. Others ended with a polite "we'll call." Late rent notices piled up. When a parent fell ill, Marcus split weeks between appointments and odd jobs. Friends say he was proud and private, generous with repairs and cautious with feelings, someone who would fix a neighbor's blender but wave off the offer of dinner or cash with the same quiet smile. As routines frayed, so did his anchors. The group chat went silent. Pickup games faded. A friend moved south for steady union work, promising to visit when things settled. And then they didn't. Into that drift came the glow of late-night forums and short clips that offered firm answers to complicated days. Algorithms rewarded certainty. Certainty felt like control. Marcus began to collect how-to threads, not just for repairs but for everything: time, money, respect, conflict. The advice sounded clear in headphones at 2 a.m. When morning came, the world stayed messy. Weeks before the incident, a porch disagreement left him feeling cornered and slighted. What might have been a forgettable exchange calcified into a story he told himself over and over. That he had been dismissed, that someone else had set the rules, that he needed to be heard. Instead of looking for help, he withdrew. Pride curdled into pressure. Pressure kept score. People who knew him describe a man of habits. He walked the same routes, counted steps between corners, and favored a jacket marked with a small hobby group decal. A club he drifted in and out of, more comfortable soldering name badges than making conversation. He kept a toolkit by the door, the bits arranged by size. A tiny brush for cleaning dust from connections. On good weeks, he was the neighbor who could tune a bike brake by ear. On bad weeks, he avoided eye contact, earbuds in, head down, counting intersections like a metronome. Isolation made ordinary frustrations feel oversized. When tempers cooled, he stayed warm. When others moved on, he stayed in the loop of his own replay. None of this explains the harm that followed, and none of it seeks to excuse the outcome felt by families on that block. It does, however, trace how pressure can accumulate quietly, how missed paychecks, missed chances, and missed conversations can bend a life, slowly and silently, until one poor choice invites a chain of worse ones. In Marcus's case, the backstory is not a justification. It is a caution about the noise that passes for guidance at midnight, about the power of unchecked pride, and about how a neighborhood can lose sight of someone who is physically present but already pulling away. Officials report that Marcus Hale acknowledged being on the block that night and arriving in the compact sedan seen in multiple recordings. Counsel was present, rights were explained, and the conversation focused on times, routes, and items already preserved in the case file. Investigators say the statements matched several verified intervals on the master timeline, enough to move the matter from interview room to docket without haste or speculation. Prosecutors have filed serious counts under state law, with additional counts possible as the technical review finishes. The next step is procedural, a hearing where a judge confirms the basis for the case, reviews conditions, and sets the schedule for future appearances. Any decisions about release, monitoring, or no-contact orders will be made in that forum. Officials emphasize that all parties are entitled to due process and that the public should treat early filings as a starting point, not an end point. Behind the scenes, the evidence workflow stays methodical. Digital items are cloned, hashed, and logged so that analysts work from verified copies, while originals remain sealed. Clothing is photographed under neutral light, measured, and stored. Video is stabilized, not altered, with audit notes explaining each step so that jurors, if it comes to that, can understand what they're seeing and why it's reliable. Discovery materials will be exchanged on a schedule, with protective orders shielding sensitive clips that show private homes or minors. Care extends outward from the case file to the people most affected. The family that lost a loved one has asked for privacy as they grieve. A designated advocate is now their single point of contact, relaying updates and helping manage practical needs, from paperwork to transportation for appointments. The child who was hurt is stable, and relatives say community support has been steady and kind. A pediatric follow-up is scheduled, and clinicians have provided a simple plan for rest, routine, and gradual return to normal activities. On the block, help is close at hand. Counselors and community leaders have set up listening hours, small circles where people can talk, share worries, and plan practical steps. Faith leaders have offered meeting space. School social workers are available for students who need to process what they heard or saw, and a local nonprofit has arranged short-term childcare vouchers for families juggling appointments. The city's trauma services team has distributed a plain language guide: how to sleep after a frightening event, how to talk with kids about sirens and news updates, how to recognize when it's time to ask for extra help. Neighbors are also focusing on environmental fixes that make streets feel cared for and watched. Porch bulbs swapped to brighter, energy-saving lamps, shrubs trimmed back from sidelines, a request for an added streetlight at the mid-block bend, and fresh paint for crosswalks near the bus stop. Community members are organizing a weekly porch-to-porch check-in at dusk, 5 minutes to greet whoever is out, exchange phone numbers, and notice if something looks off before it becomes a problem. At City Hall, The communications team has pledged predictable updates, a brief after each key hearing, posted in multiple languages, with links to services rather than speculation. Interpreters will be available in court as needed, and accessibility coordinators are on call for residents who require mobility or hearing accommodations. The message from officials is steady. Accountability and care travel together. One looks back to establish responsibility. The other looks forward to repair what can be repaired. For Marcus, the path now runs through scheduled appearances, filings, and review. For the neighborhood, it runs through small daily acts that rebuild ease. Lights on at dusk, calls answered on the first ring, familiar faces on the steps, and the quiet reassurance that, even after a hard night, people still look out for one another. In the end, the case moved because small pieces aligned. City cameras, receipts, schedules, and an audience willing to examine a single frame without turning it into a story it wasn't. The lesson is not that one tool solved everything, but that many modest tools, used carefully and compared honestly, can create momentum without sacrificing fairness. Dan Bongino described his part simply: spot a tiny public queue, ask for verification, and pass credible leads to the people whose job is to vet them. That balance mattered. It kept the spotlight on verifiable detail instead of speculation, and it reminded everyone that cooperation works best when each role is respected. What comes next is equally important. Investigators will continue to treat the file like a living timeline, adding clarifications, tightening intervals, and preserving a record that can stand up to careful review. City technicians will audit camera clocks so that future compilations line up by default. Public communications will stay predictable, short updates tied to real milestones, not to rumor cycles. When the hearing schedule advances, residents will know what is happening and why, in plain language and multiple formats. For the neighborhood, the plan is grounded in visible, manageable steps. Porch bulbs are being swapped for brighter, energy-saving lamps. Shrubs are trimmed to widen sightlines. A mid-block streetlight request has moved from idea to work order. Small business owners are coordinating opening and closing routines, so someone is always a friendly set of eyes on the corner at the same times each day. A porch-to-porch check-in will run every Thursday at dusk. 5 minutes to greet, exchange numbers, and make sure elders have what they need. None of these actions is dramatic. Together, they rebuild ease. Care continues in quieter spaces. Counselors will keep listening hours for anyone who wants to talk through what the night stirred up. School staff will offer simple guidance for families. How to help kids sleep after sirens. How to answer questions without fueling worry. How to notice when extra support could help. A local nonprofit is organizing weekend sessions where teens can learn practical skills, bike repairs, basic coding, music production, small anchors that give a sense of progress and place. On the media side, the broadcast community is taking its own notes. Producers are refining checklists for responsible public review. Blur faces, mask addresses, avoid labels, and emphasize how to share tips safely. The goal is to keep the signal high and the temperature low, an approach that allows viewers to contribute without creating pressure on private residents or on the case itself. When leads arrive, they'll be passed through the same narrow channel to investigators, so records stay clean and steps are traceable. And there is civic housework to do. The city's open data team will publish a neutral explainer on how timing, mapping, and metadata support cases, what gets used, what stays private, and how oversight works. Community volunteers will pair with block captains to catalog small fixes that matter. Loose lamps, faded crosswalks, bus shelter bulbs. Faith leaders are coordinating a calendar, so there's always a warm room and a hot drink for anyone who wants to sit with neighbors and talk about ordinary things, jobs, school events, what's growing in the shared planter boxes this month. None of this erases loss. Accountability now lives with the courts, and care lives with the community. But the story of this case demonstrates something sturdy. When a city links arms, tiny details can travel farther than loud claims, and steady process can outpace panic. Tonight, Baltimore turned a page. There is loss, and there is accountability. There is pain, and there's a plan. More light, more listening, more eyes on the little things that keep neighborhoods whole. Marcus Hale now faces the courts. The rest of us face the work of learning from a long night. So a porch can feel like a porch again. A shared meal can stay a shared meal. And the city can keep linking arms across every quiet street.